The New York Mets are going to build a strong lineup behind their two best players in Francisco Lindor and Juan Soto. They're going to need some young players to step up, but they're also going to need some veterans to get back to being who they were. Can Brandon Nimmo and Jeff McNeil get back to playing at an all-star or a near all-star level 2025? We're going to talk about it on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Going into 2025, who is the third best hitter on the New York Mets? Number one's Juan Soto. Number two is clearly Francisco Lindor. Who's number three? The fact that a lot of you are probably thinking about Mark Vientos says something about the homegrown veterans who are getting paid right now by the New York Mets. And we'll set Starling Marte aside because Marte is on the final year of a 4-year deal. He's in his late 30s at this point. I don't expect Starling Marte to turn back the clock. But you have two guys who are getting paid a pretty good amount, who are homegrown Mets, who have outlasted some players that I don't think we ever would have expected them to. In 2019, when Pete Alonso and Jeff McNeil both make the All-Star game together, who would you have thought was going to be a Met longer? Alonso or McNeil? If you go back to 2015, when Brandon Nimmo was a top prospect along with Michael Conforto, and Conforto leapfrogged him, made it onto the roster mid-season, and played a huge role in a World Series run, who do you think was going to be playing baseball in a Mets uniform into his deep 30s? Conforto or Nimmo? Due to a variety of circumstances, these are the guys that have gotten paid by this franchise long term. And I think if David Stearns had taken over a couple summers sooner, if he had gotten out of that Brewers contract, there's a world where neither of these guys are Mets right now. I don't know if David Stearns is going to give Brandon Nimmo an 8-year deal, no matter how good he was in 2022. But you had Billy Epler, who was more than willing to spend, Steve Cohen, who likely wanted to keep these guys around, and they got deals coming off of an outstanding 2022 season where Steve Cohen was really willing to pay everybody and keep the band together because they won 101 games. Now you look ahead to 2025 and look, saying, from the cold open of the show today, can these guys get back to an all-star level? I mean, Jeff McNeil, we'll set him aside until the final segment. I'm not necessarily expecting that. I'm hoping that McNeil can do what he did in the second half last year. And again, we will talk about that later. But Brandon Nimmo is going into his age 32 season. If your prime is 26 to 32, this is the last year of his absolute prime. Now, can Nimmo still have a couple really good seasons after this? Sure. But this might be the last year of his physical prime. And so the question is, what kind of hitter will Brandon Nimmo be? Because last year, he did a couple things that we've never seen before. He drove in 90 runs. Never even gotten to 70 before last year. That was a huge improvement. We'll talk about his numbers with runners in scoring position soon. Outstanding. He stole 15 bases, added another wrinkle to his game, and was 15 for 15. That was all awesome. With that said, if you're looking at what Brandon Nimmo has been throughout his career, he fell off last year. It was the first season of his career outside of a 32-game, 80-plate appearance cup of coffee in 2016, where Brandon Nimmo finished with an on-base percentage below 360 and a slugging percentage below 400. It was 399, but it was still below 400. Weighted runs created plus is a stat that measures hitters on a league average of 100, WRC plus. It's the same thing as OPS plus. Brandon Nimmo has been very consistent when it came to his WRC plus because he always got on base at a big clip, walked a ton, and hit for a pretty high average, as well as doing some of the other things well. But the main part about Brandon Nimmo's WRC plus was that ability to get on base. Last year, the on-base percentage dropped off a cliff, as did his WRC plus. First time ever outside of that rookie season. And again, that's a cup of coffee. I think he still had rookie status in 2017. But still, the first time his WRC plus was below 115. It's really interesting to look at how Nimmo has evolved as a hitter, because he was way too passive at the beginning of his career. The walk rates were always great. They were at 14% or better from 2017 through 2021. And he got on base at a 400 clip 3 times across that span. He cleared 375 on his on-base percentage every year. But he also struck out a lot more back then, over 25% for most of those seasons. It wasn't until 2021, or actually 2020, the shortened season, and then 2021, where we saw a drop in that strikeout rate. And then the walk rate dropped in 2022, where for the past couple seasons, he's been living more in the 10 to 11% range instead of 15%. Now, if he impacts the baseball, you're cool with it. You're cool with an on-base percentage in the 360s if you're going to get the 20 home runs, as opposed to getting on base at a 380 to 400 clip, but with less than 15 homers. You'll take that trade-off. With that said, the power numbers the last couple of years, 47 home runs, he had 24 in 2023, 23 last year. They haven't necessarily made him a better hitter based on WRC plus, and just in general. You can't have that huge drop-off in on-base percentage. If he puts up the numbers he did in 2023 and 2022, where he hit 274 each year, had an on-base percentage in that 360 range, and found that power, all right, well, now he is playing near an all-star level. When he finishes the year with a batting average at 224 and an on-base percentage in the 320s as well, that's not the guy you want him to be. So Brandon Nimmo has to get back to some of the things that he did well. Or was last year a season where Brandon Nimmo just got absurdly unlucky? Because if you look at his batting average on balls put in play, he was way lower than his career norm. So was it all bad luck, or is there something else to explain the relative regression we saw from Brandon Nimmo in 2024? I'm going to break that down in the next segment. First, though, a quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is a fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And Game Time Picks is going to make it easier for you to get tickets to your favorite live events, because Game Time Picks will filter out the fluff and show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. You can also view your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. They have their all-in pricing feature where you can see your fees calculated into the price, so you don't have to be surprised when you go to checkout. Also, you can buy tickets up to an hour after the game starts. So Game Time is the place to go for last-minute tickets. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Our next goal is to get to 13,000 subscribers. I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. For his career, Brandon Nimmo's batting average on balls put in play is .322. Last year, his BABIP was .267. I talked about that drop in batting average from .274 2 years in a row, 2022 and 2023, all the way down to .224. That 50-point drop-off, it could be baked in right there with just bad luck. Just nothing but bad luck. Hitting fly balls or line drives right at people. Great plays being made on the infield against them. You could say it was just bad luck. You look at his ground ball rate, his line drive rate, his fly ball rate, his home run to fly ball rate, his pull rate, how much hitting the ball at the middle, his going oppo, his hard hit rates, all these different things. You look at all of them, you cannot find a singular thread to pull on that explains how much those numbers dropped off. And the walk rate was good too. So the walk rate was in line. So that doesn't explain the drop in on-base percentage. It was the drop in average. Brandon Nimmo's not a 220 hitter. Brandon Nimmo should be hitting at least 270. He has that capability. So what really went wrong? Well, if you're trying to look at some of the pitch data stuff, he really struggled against anything but a fastball last year. His whiff rate on off-speed pitches and on breaking pitches was over 30%. That is not common for Nimmo to be whiffing that often. His batting average against breaking balls was 209. The slug was 344. His batting average against off-speed pitches was 169. Slug was 423. Not great. You look at what he did in 2023. He hit over 300 on both types of pitches, over 300 on off-speed and on breaking balls, and he slugged over 450 on both of those pitches. This is not a guy that can't hit breaking balls or can't hit off-speed pitches, but for whatever reason last year, all he was really thriving on was fastballs. But there was one thing he did very well. Brandon Nimmo hit with runners in scoring position. He had a 310 average, 424 on base, 607 slug when there was runners on. A 184 WRC plus, 84% better than your league average hitter. The base is empty though. He hit 168, 269 on base, 275 slug, a 62 WRC plus for a guy that has been a leadoff hitter for a majority of his career. He shouldn't be uncomfortable with the bases empty, but for whatever reason, he just could not figure it out last year. I really respect a guy that if you're going to do it one way, do it the way Nimmo did it. If you're not going to hit in one facet, make sure you hit when the runners are on because you're still going to drive in 90, and that's ultimately going to make you a very, very big piece of a lineup. If you're driving in runs, you're doing the things that really matter, you're going to be able to stomach some drop off in stats overall if he's just not hitting when there's runners on. Or excuse me, when there's runners not on, when the bases are empty. But still, it's very strange. Strikeout rate, comparing the two. With runners on base, strikeout rate is under 20%. With the bases empty, strikeout rate jumped to 27.2%. I don't know if I can really figure that out, honestly. The only thing I would say is maybe chasing a little bit more in those spots. When there's runners on, maybe Brandon Nimmo was able to focus in and be a little more selective. But when the bases were empty, maybe he was trying to make something happen. This is a guy that has continued to add power to his game. And with that, you are going to chase a little bit more, and you're going to take potentially a little bit of a longer swing at times. Those things are to be expected, but this is a pretty big drop-off from what you'd expect from Brandon Nimmo when it comes to batting average, which in turn relates to getting on base. Now, one thing that you can't ignore with Brandon Nimmo, this guy got hurt last year. So first half of the season, Brandon Nimmo has a 248 average, 361 on base, 454 slug, 815 OPS, 133 WRC plus. That's playing closer to his career norms. Granted, you'd expect him to hit a little bit better than 248, but he got on base at a 360 clip and he slugged at a 450 clip. You have an OPS over 800, you're doing good. Second half, he hit 190, got on base at a 277 clip, slugs at a 319 clip. All of a sudden, that OPS dropped below 700. What happened from the first half to the second half? Well, he was dealing with plantar fasciitis all year, which is an extremely painful injury for any athlete to go through, and just any person if you've dealt with it in your own life. I've been fortunate, and I should knock on a lot of wood here, but that has not been something that has plagued me. But I know a lot of my friends who I have heard have dealt with something like that. Typically, it could be sports related, but again, it could just be overuse in general. Plantar fasciitis is such a tough injury because you can play through it. It's pain management, but it is very painful and it can make you not feel like yourself, whether that's in the field or in the box. He also rolled over his shoulder trying to come in on that one ball, and he didn't miss much time in the lineup because of it, but I do wonder how that impacted him in the second half. He was a little more tentative in the outfield, and I don't know if that carried over with how he was swinging the bat. Was he not letting it rip as much, not letting it eat in the zone? Maybe he just got to a point where he was having a good at bat, trying to be disciplined at the plate, but didn't feel like he really could attack in the same way he did earlier on in the season. What I would look at with Brandon Nimmo, though, is the fact that there was a first half where he had it. The fact that with runners in scoring position, he was able to come through. The fact that he still played 151 games, stole bases through all the injuries. To me, Brandon Nimmo has a very good chance of having a huge season this year. And I don't mean he's going to replace Pete Alonso's 40 home runs, or even that he'll get to 30. But I think Brandon Nimmo, assuming health, is going to have a really good year because I think Juan Soto can impact Brandon Nimmo's game more than most hitters in the lineup. Who's the other left-handed hitter that can benefit from watching Soto's approach? Jesse Winker jumps out for sure. Brett Beatty, great for him. Hopefully he can figure some things out. But a guy that's going to be in there every day is Brandon Nimmo. And I think Brandon Nimmo, watching Juan Soto work, picking up on his tendencies, figuring out, what he can maybe improve on. And Nimmo is always one to be working hard, to be improving. I think we could see Brandon Nimmo really have a strong season, batting fourth maybe in the Mets lineup. I don't know how they're going to do it. I imagine they're keeping Lindor in the leadoff spot, although I think you could make the case that putting Nimmo back in the leadoff spot to have him get some better pitches with Juan Soto behind him, but also Nimmo has thrived in a leadoff spot before. He didn't really thrive beyond batting first or second last year. I think part of that was because he was batting first and second for the first half, and then the second half is when he was batting third and fourth more and even further down the lineup. And so that could explain why the numbers are so bad in those other parts of the lineup, because really outside of batting first and second, he was a below average hitter in every single spot. But you can make a case that having Lindor hit behind Soto is the best chance that Soto is going to have to get real protection in this lineup. Either him or Mark Vientos. I imagine they'll keep Lindor where he thrived. They'll put Soto batting second, and then Lindor gets pitched to even more. And that's ultimately, I think, the way to do it. And then Mark Vientos is probably your 3-hole hitter behind Juan Soto. But I think Nimmo probably bats fourth. I don't know who else would. I don't think they're going to bat Jesse Winker above Brandon Nimmo or Francisco Alvarez or anybody else in this lineup. I think Nimmo's probably going to bat cleanup. And granted, last year he proved he can hit with runners in scoring position, so that's great if he keeps that up. Awesome. But he's got to hit for a higher average overall. I mean, and I'm usually not a guy to harp on average, but when you have a player like Nimmo where the walk rate stayed consistent, the strikeout rate, it climbed a little bit, but it wasn't completely abnormal. Then you look at why the numbers weren't where you'd want them to be, and it really just comes down to getting those hits. And with the fact that, again, he had a strong first half, he was very unlucky, all of these things, and he dealt with all the injuries, I imagine that Nimmo can get back to the guy that he was in 2022 and 2023, where that average can jump to 274 instead of 224, and then on-base percentage can get over 360. If he just adds those extra hits, last year, instead of having a 399 slug, he would have had a 450 slug. And then all of a sudden, you're doing fine overall. And you have the OPS that's going to be over 800. You might be right back in that 820 range, that sweet spot. If you can hit the 23 to 24 home runs again, driving 90, all the counting stats were good. It's just getting everything else up around it. And look, if he does, I mean, there is a world where there's more runners on base, and Nimmo could put in his first 100 RBI season. Maybe he does get more opportunities where guys have nowhere to put Brandon Nimmo, and he hits some grand slams, and he ends up, increasing the power numbers a little bit too, and getting beyond 25 home runs for the first time in his career. I think this might be the year Brandon Nimmo becomes an all-star. It's going to be a little bit tougher because Juan Soto should be an all-star. I would hope Francisco Lindor finally gets in. And so now you're going to be potentially the third all-star. The Mets would have to have a really good first half for Nimmo to really get that consideration. But I think this might be the year that we look back on and say that was Brandon Nimmo's best season. I think this is like the last chance across this contract. And maybe I'm not being fair to him because this guy has incredible work ethic and he should age fairly well. But this feels like the year where Brandon Nimmo at 32 years old could have his best season yet. Or we'll see that average stay where it was, and he might be a little bit more of a streaky hitter moving forward, and maybe he is in a decline. We're going to find out. But I have a lot higher hopes for Brandon Nimmo than I do for Jeff McNeil, although McNeil, I think, can still be better than what we've seen in the last couple of years. And that's what I'm going to talk about to close out the show. First, though, a quick word from our sponsors. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where I get updates from me anytime news breaks on the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways. If you want to be Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. As we look at Jeff McNeil, this is a guy that has fallen off a cliff. 3 of the last 4 years, he has been at or slightly below league average offensively. This was a hitter that was once a shoo-in to hit over 300 every year, to get on base at least a 350 clip, but you expected on base percentages in the 380s for Jeff McNeil. Now, you don't know what you're going to get from McNeil. And last year, he had a brutal season overall. 238 average, 308 on base, 384 slug, but he was much better in the second half. He hit 289. He got on base at a 376 clip. He slugged at a 547 clip, which you put that all together, it's an OPS over 900 for Jeff McNeil. And a WRC plus of 156 in 40 games. Had 7 home runs, 12 doubles. That matched his extra base total in the first half. So across 85 games in the first half, he had 19 extra base hits. Across 40 games before he got hurt in the second half, 19 extra base hits. It's still in there with Jeff McNeil, which is what almost makes it even more frustrating. And more than Nimmo, where I think he went into the market after a career year in 2022, and there was other teams in. He was the best center fielder in that class, and that's why he got 8 years. Jeff McNeil got paid in a an arbitration extension. He had that point, I guess it pretty much, I think it was his first year of arbitration, right? Or was he a Super 2 guy? He might have been a Super 2 guy. Regardless, he would have been a free agent after the 2024 season. And the Mets bought out, was it 2 arbitration years? Okay, so now I'm figuring out the math there. Geez. 2 arbitration years and a couple free agent years. And at the time, it made sense because he had just won a batting title. Unfortunately, and I hate to say it because I don't like to judge guys on work ethic and things that I can't actually see, but it does feel like they paid the wrong guy. When Anthony Rendon was making all those waves last year, or I guess the last couple years, and there's all this talk about the guy that just doesn't love to play baseball. You had some former players that spoke about it and they said, you'd be surprised how many guys don't really like to play the game of baseball. And I hate to put that on Jeff McNeil, but it does feel like this is a player that is very good at baseball, but might not love baseball. He loves golf. And I've tried to stay away from the golf criticism that Mets fans are quick to jump on with McNeil. But here's what I'll say. Who do you think has been working hard this offseason to get better at baseball? Mark Vientos, Brett Beatty, Francisco Alvarez, 100%. Now, those guys are at the beginning of their careers, so they have a little bit more to fight for. But Francisco Lindor has a $341 million contract, and I don't think he ever stops. Lindor works as hard in the offseason as he does in season. Brandon Nimmo, I'm sure he's working hard. Pete Alonso, not a Met right now, but you see videos of him in Tampa. He's working hard. When's the last time you saw a Jeff McNeil workout video? Jeff McNeil, I would venture to guess he doesn't pick up a bat until probably right about now. A couple weeks before spring training, if that. And he almost says as much in a story by Mike Puma in the New York Post, part of their Post Sports Plus. He had some interesting quotes here. He wants to get off to a better start this season. So here's what he said about that. I want to see some good numbers in spring training this year. I think that'll help me out. I didn't have the year I wanted to, so you want to do well in spring training. you haven't played in 4 or 5 months. So it's tough to get off to a hot start in spring training. But those last few weeks of camp, you want to be hitting the ball well, driving the ball a little bit, have that rollover. He says it as much. You haven't played in 4 or 5 months. I think Francisco Lindor, while he hasn't played in a game, has been playing baseball. And I'm not judging guys because you know what? It is the offseason. You don't have to be playing. And in the past, I think a lot of guys would just get away. I think there is something to be said about the mental side of baseball that you do have to step back. And I don't expect all these guys to be hitting every single day. Because I know there's a lot of guys that love the game that do step away from taking as much hacks during the offseason. But I think Jeff McNeil really unplugs. And so if you go into spring training like last year and you're hurt, it's much harder to get into the flow of the season. He says as much last year was tough for me because I got hurt in spring training. It didn't really get the reps I wanted to, and the swing did not feel like where I wanted it. And if you remember, he had a bicep strain that he dealt with and pretty much got like a couple of games at the end of spring and then just rolled into the season. He says, I felt like I had a good idea of what I wanted to do going into spring training with my approach and everything, and it wasn't really working out. So I kind of flipped the script halfway through the year, kind of changed some things, went back to looking at the numbers when I was having a lot of success, try to replicate that. And I was able to do that in the second half of the year. I'm going to spring training, trying to do what I did last year in the second half, drive the ball a little bit more. Jeff McNeil is one of the biggest victims of the shift not being there because he would just demolish a shift. He would, find, oh, you're gonna shift me hard. All right, I'm gonna find the gaps. Oh, you're not shifting me. Well, now I'm gonna pull a little bit more, take advantage of that until you do shift against me, and then I'm gonna go back to spraying the ball the other way. He was just really adept at beating it, and I think he often gets into this mode of trying to place the ball where guys aren't instead of just trying to hit the ball hard, and that's what he's talking about, driving the baseball. The thing about Jeff McNeil is I think when he's in season, I'm not saying he's playing golf every single day and he's just showing up to the ballpark for the games and that's it. I do think Jeff McNeil cares when he's in season. I don't want to paint this as Jeff McNeil just doesn't care because he got paid. But I do think that by paying him early, you did take away some of that incentive to keep pushing. And now I think he's in a mode where he doesn't want to be embarrassed. He doesn't want to suck. And if there's one guy on the Mets that takes the struggles the hardest, it's McNeil. I mean, he has the worst body language maybe I've ever seen from a major leaguer. I mean, it's bad. It can get really bad. His frustration, I mean, he lets it go. And that shows you he does care about putting up numbers. But Jeff McNeil, to me, he's the guy that's just naturally great at things. That's why he's so good at golf. He's the type of guy that you're in a bar with him and, he picks up some darts and he's just like money. You go to a bowling alley and he's able to bowl a 200 with ease. It's one of those guys that's just naturally good at stuff. And so there's a lot of talent that's in there. And I don't think that talent has gone away because we saw it in the second half where he was able to put up a 900 OPS across a 40-game sample size. If Jeff McNeil is what he was in the second half, in the first half of the season, I'd almost venture to say he's a better shot to be an all-star than Brandon Nimmo because outfield a lot more loaded than second base. So, especially in the National League where some of the best second basemen in baseball in the AL, when you think about Jose Altuve and Marcus Semien. So we'll see what Jeff McNeil does this season. I would say, though, going into camp, there's a fan perception that I've seen out there that Luis Angel Acuna can beat Jeff McNeil for the starting second base job. And that would be really impressive if he did. I think you're asking too much of Acuna to step in his first full big league season and actually be a better hitter overall than Jeff McNeil. It's still a former batting champion. It's still a two-time All-Star. And we have seen pockets in the last 2 years where he has gotten back to being something close to that guy. Unfortunately, it's been the second half. If he has another dreadful start to the season, at some point, you're not going to keep giving him those opportunities. But I think Jeff McNeil can have a much better season. I think being healthy in spring will go a long way for him because He's not going to be playing catch up for the first 2 months of the season. He can hopefully get himself into game shape, if not by the end of spring training. But once you get through April and you get into May, maybe he is where he was last year in July. And then all of a sudden, you put that together for the final 5 months of the year, and you could be looking up at a guy that has a huge resurgence and actually is a really good hitter again. I'm not going to hold out too much hope on it. I'm not going to, say he's definitely going to get back to hitting 300. That shit might have sailed. But can Jeff McNeil at the end of the day have a 270 average, get on base instead of a 320 clip? Can he get on base closer to 350, 360 again? Can he end up popping 15 homers? I think we saw some of that power in the second half that would suggest that he can. I'm still holding that hope that Jeff McNeil can be an above-average second baseman for the New York Mets this year, and he obviously still gives you that positional versatility. That's great. I'm hoping that we see Jeff McNeil have the best season yet on this contract, because he's going into age 33. So, you're running out of prime years with some of these guys, and these are the guys that are on the books still getting paid. So hopefully the Mets can get a better year out of Brandon Nimmo and a much better year out of Jeff McNeil. And if those guys do hit, your lineup is a lot longer than it is right now. It looks way better if those two guys can get back to being what they have been throughout their careers. Because then all of a sudden, instead of all the pressure being on the top three of the lineup and on Francisco Alvarez having a sort of breakout season offensively, on the Jesse Winker, Starling Marte platoon to do really big things, on getting any offensive production from your center fielder. If you have Nimmo and McNeil rolling, that lineup is going to be so much better. So hopefully they can actually pull that off. We'll see what it looks like. That's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. I appreciate all of you for tuning in. On tomorrow's show, I think we might talk about the future of the corner infield spots for the New York Mets. Obviously, there's been a lot there when it comes to the guys that are, campaigning or auditioning come spring training for that potential starting spot that's going to be open. But I want to look beyond that. I want to talk about some prospects who is in the system, like a Ryan Clifford, that could come up and be an impact player, and how long it's going to take till you see some of those guys. So if you want to get some prospect talk, tune in tomorrow. If you're listening on the audio side, make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every day. Now, for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports. We're talking about Locked On Sports Today with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.